And so at that moment, Theodore Roosevelt basically declares war, not so much on Germany, but on Woodrow Wilson. Now, he'd run against Wilson for president, but he really hadn't come to hate Woodrow Wilson so much in 1912. He was too busy hating William Howard Taft to notice how much he was going to hate Woodrow Wilson. But he soon discovers that, and it's not so much because of the war or the fact that they had run against each other. They knew each other from a long, long time ago. They had appeared on a podium talking about municipal reform in Baltimore in 1896. And most remarkably, and TR was a fan of Wilson when he was a reforming president of Princeton University. When Theodore Roosevelt rushes down from the Adirondacks, when he hears that William McKinley is dying in Buffalo, and he's got to get to that bedside and then ultimately be sworn in as President of the United States, one of the first people he sees is Woodrow Wilson, remarkably, who is coming back from a vacation in Ontario. And they meet. But eventually, Wilson starts sniping at TR, and by the 1915, TR is seriously angry at Woodrow Wilson. Why? Not so much because of the war, not because they've run against each other, but because Wilson has proposed a treaty with Colombia, which is going to apologize for how the United States of America took the Panama Canal and the province of Panama from Colombia. And that's really an apology not only for what the United States did, but more importantly for what Theodore Roosevelt did. And Theodore Roosevelt does not approve of that one way or another. So Theodore Roosevelt has his reasons to be mad in 1915 about the Lusitania and about Woodrow Wilson. And he will lead the fight for preparedness in this country. Now, the country doesn't particularly want to get into the war. Why should we, aside from these sinkings of ocean liners and the occasional deaths of Americans? We really don't have a dog in the fight in Europe. We may be upset about what the Germans have done in rampaging through neutral Belgium and all that, but, you know, it's the popular song at that time is "I Didn't Raise My Boy to Be a Soldier." That's the #1 hit. Americans don't want to go to war. There's a lot of German Americans in this country. There's a lot of Irish Americans in this country who are not particularly in love with the British Empire. There are a lot of Jewish Americans in this country who do not want to go to war for a seriously anti-Semitic czarist regime. So you've got all these reasons why people may not want to go to war. But TR is a very belligerent, militaristic person, the most militaristic, belligerent president in our history. Although there's always irony in life, and there's always irony in history. So this most belligerent of presidents, actually, we have peace during his 7 years of the presidency. We see him winning that Nobel Peace Prize for bringing peace between Russia and between the Japanese Empire. And when war breaks out in Europe in 1914, he's actually very mellow about it. And he's uncharacteristically TR. He says, well, we should get behind the president. We should get behind Wilson. We should realize that, sometimes great powers do what they have to do. Germany might have to go through Belgium. So there's a treaty. We don't have to always abide by these treaties when they're in the way of great powers. That doesn't last long. And before long, he's doing what he does with the Lusitania incident. He's criticizing the Germans, and more, he's criticizing the Woodrow Wilson administration. Wilson has a very confused attitude toward what we should be doing. When the Lusitania is sunk, and afterwards, he has a Secretary of State, William Jennings Bryan, who is a pacifist. He has the Secretary of War, who is Lindley Garrison, who is an interventionist. Both of these guys are going to resign at about the same time because they disagree with Wilson's policies. That tells you it's a very confused administration, and Wilson compounds it by replacing the isolationist Bryan with an interventionist Lansing, and replacing the interventionist Lindsey Garrison at war with an outright pacifist Newton Baker as Secretary of War. So Theodore Roosevelt has his reasons for being angry at Woodrow Wilson and his policies. You know, we are training with broomsticks. The soldiers, the infantry are training with broomsticks instead of rifles. We historically have a very small standing army in this country, going back all the way to Washington. And while while Theodore Roosevelt had built up the Navy and was a big Navy man when he was in Washington, he was less so in building up the Army. And that all catches up to America. To remedy the situation, there is a friend of Theodore Roosevelt named General Leonard Wood. Wood had been Army Chief of Staff under William Howard Taft, and was still in the Army, and he comes up with an idea, again, upstate, called the Plattsburgh idea. And what he's going to do is all the middle class and upper middle class gentlemen, often a lot of Harvard people, and often a lot of people who belong to the Harvard Club in New York City, including Theodore Roosevelt's son, T.R. Jr., get together. And how I spent my summer vacation. I spent my summer vacation at Plattsburgh or at various other places learning to be an officer, learning to train men, learning to deal with the military situation. And this is a fairly successful program, and to take a look at this success, he invites various people, Wood does, invites various people to come up and review the troops, one of whom is his old pal, Theodore Roosevelt, who, in reviewing all these men, gives a tremendously inflammatory speech excoriating the Wilson administration. And Wood says, could you kind of massage those remarks before you give them out to the press? And TR, being TR, goes full bore and really accelerates those, which leads to Leonard Wood having to extend an apology to the War Department, to Woodrow Wilson. But TR is not going to apologize. He's going to continue to urge preparedness and to angle towards something else, which is another try for the presidency of the United States. In splitting the Republican Party in 1912, he, who had been the great idol of Republicans, is now their bête noire. The regular Republicans really don't want anything more to do with him. He created this situation which handed the country over to Woodrow Wilson. He had broken the party, and you know, civil wars are the meanest, worst form of wars. And so the Civil War in the Republican Party, how do you get it back together? The Progressive Party had continued to function in 1914. It did very badly in the midterm elections, but it was still functioning. But when it comes time to have the political conventions in 1916, what's going to happen? The Republicans are going to meet in Chicago because the Republicans would always meet in Chicago in those days. But the Progressives also announced they were going to meet in Chicago, and they were going to meet at the exact same time. So the rapprochement is this kind of awkward dance of how the parties are going to get back together again. And it's not just the conservative Republicans, the Stan Pat Republicans, the organization Republicans, the Taft Republicans, the Billy Barnes Republicans, who are wary of the progressives. The progressives are very wary of the conservatives in the Republican Party. So how do you put them back together? Theodore Roosevelt is kind of angling for the presidency to come back again, but how do you do it? He doesn't know how to do it. Nobody really knows how to do it. And how do you reproach and come up with a compromise candidate in that year? He goes on a Caribbean cruise earlier in the year, and he gives out a famous remark. He said, "The American people should not take me for the president again unless they are in a heroic mood." In other words, you have to buy into my ideal of American military preparedness. Otherwise, don't take me. But he's sort of hedging his bets here because he's down. He's been beaten, and he will say over and over again to people, you know, if I think I'm a political liability. If I advocate something, the American people may turn away from it. If I say this, they may think, well, he's saying this because he wants to come back politically, not because it is true. I'm sort of like box office poison at this point. Okay, so he's very wary about how to go about it, and afraid of being rejected yet again by a country that had once loved him, which once had idolized him. So the parties get together, and the logical candidate for the Republicans is a guy, another upstater, Charles Evans Hughes, born in Glens Falls, raised further out west, really in terms of his life career, a New York, Wall Street kind of lawyer. Not a corporate guy, but a reformer. The problem with Hughes for TR is that TR hates his guts. Just doesn't like him, whether it's because Hughes is the new reformer on the block. By this time, Hughes is on the Supreme Court of the United States of America. He's an associate justice. But, you know, they would turn. Occasionally, the parties would turn to get people off the bench. Okay? So in 1904, they turned to an upstate judge, Alton B. Parker, from Kingston, to run against Theodore Roosevelt. He came off the state bench. And so the Republicans are thinking of getting Charles Evans Hughes off the national Supreme Court. Woodrow Wilson reads the papers. He knows what's going on here. And he approaches another member of the Supreme Court who approaches Hughes and says, how'd you like to be Chief Justice when the Chief Justice retires? Oh, Wilson would never appoint me. Oh, yes, he would. But you can't make a deal with Charles Evans Hughes. So he will walk away from not only the Chief Justiceship, but from the entire Supreme Court of the United States to accept the Republican nomination that year. Now, will TR accept Hughes? The progressives are hell-bent. Well, the Progressive Party is split like the Republican Party is. It has a right-wing and a left-wing component. I mean, relatively speaking, these things are always relative. On the right of the Republican Party, of the Progressive Party, is a guy named George W. Perkins, who was big-time Wall Street, big-time one-percenter. And he had been bankrolling the supposedly left-wing Progressive Party. And one of the things that he does is influence its platform, so it becomes less and less anti-monopolistic. Theodore Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson had two different theories of how to deal with monopolies. Wilson's was break them up. And Roosevelt's were, oh, break them up if they're bad, but I'll decide who's bad. Okay? So the really hardcore progressives do not trust Perkins, but Perkins has Roosevelt's ear. And one of the things that Perkins does is, you know, you wouldn't go to the convention if you were running for office. TR is at Oyster Bay. So he's not attending the Republican convention, he's not contending, holding on to the progressive, but we have sort of the tapes. We have transcripts of his conversations, and we know that he's toying with the progressives, that he's stringing them along. He has no interest whatsoever of running third party again and getting his head handed to him and re-electing Woodrow Wilson. So he's stringing them along, and he has a habit, Woodrow Wilson has a habit of throwing people overboard in his career. So does TR. And he really treats these progressives, these idealists, very badly in this campaign. He also does something else. There's another judge who gets off the bench in 1916 to run for governor. And his name is Samuel Seabury. Judge Samuel Seabury is the guy who cleaned up Tammany in 1932, but he was on the state Supreme Court or Court of Appeals back then. And TR says, I'll give you the progressive part. I will endorse you if you run against a Republican governor. And Seabury gets off the bench, gives up a 14-year term or something, and TR just throws him overboard, throws him completely overboard. Seabury goes to Oyster Bay, knocks on his door to yell at TR, and TR just says, tough. I mean, very, very cynical in that regard. Not the idealist. TR campaigns for Hughes. He's sort of the campaign. I can't think of another situation where the campaign surrogate becomes so much of the issue. He's more of the issue than Hughes is. So that the people who want to stay out of war in 1916 are saying, if you elect Hughes, look who's behind him. Theodore Roosevelt is behind him, and Theodore Roosevelt is a warmonger. And we're going to get into war if you elect Charles Evans Hughes as President of the United States. The election is very close. Theodore Roosevelt, pulls sort of a Dewey on election night and says, yes, Hughes has won, but he hasn't won. And he also says something else. He says, if Hughes is elected, I'm through with politics. He is always saying, I'm through with politics. One way or another, it's always the Sarah Bernhardt farewell tour. You'll never see him again. But in fact, that changes very quickly when America goes to war in April 1917. And when he goes to war, or when America goes to war, TR wants to go to war. He wanted to go to war when we invaded or incursioned into Mexico against Pancho Villa, or before that time, even before when Taft was president. He wants to go and fight. He wants to lead a brigade or a few regiments into combat on the Western Front. And he approaches Secretary of State, Secretary of War Newton Baker about this, and also the President of the United States. At one point, now TR has had some severe health problems. I mean, going back to his ill-fated expedition to the Amazon. But he can occasionally get, really back in gear again. And he goes deep sea fishing in Florida at about this time. And even though he has no experience in harpooning great sea creatures, okay, he harpoons the second biggest sea creature, or it's like a manta ray or an octopus in history with almost no practice whatsoever. But he's coming back up from Washington, war has been declared, and he gets off the train and runs to the White House and wants to talk to Woodrow Wilson about getting authorization to lead an army personally into France. Wilson's not home. It always helps to give some advance word, but Wilson's not home. But Roosevelt comes back a few weeks later, again unannounced, but Wilson knows he's coming. And they talk, and Wilson thinks that, or Roosevelt thinks that Wilson will give his approval, but he doesn't. And Wilson is right not to give his approval because Roosevelt is old. He's blind in one eye from a boxing match in the White House. He's seriously overweight. He's pushing 60 years old. And he's, of course, somewhat, shall we say, insubordinate. Can you really trust this guy to take orders? No, you can't. So Wilson turns him down. Roosevelt is complaining to his former cabinet member, Elihu Root, about this. And he said, I went to Wilson and I explained to him that I was only asking permission to go to France and die. And Root said, did you make that perfectly clear? Evidently, he should have put it in writing. But he doesn't go. But 5 of his children go. A daughter goes. His daughter goes as a nurse along with her husband who is a surgeon. She goes. 4 sons go. The oldest, Ted Jr., then Archie, Kermit, and Quentin. Kermit actually joins up with the British Army first, goes to Mesopotamia, meets Lawrence of Arabia, and at one point he comes across a bunch of Turkish soldiers in Mesopotamia, Iraq. And it's like he's by himself and he doesn't even have a pistol with him. But he has a riding crop because he's with the British Army, and he just starts waving his riding crop and says, "Okay, boys, surrender now." And they do. And he gets a nice medal, and he eventually goes off to France to join his 3 brothers. Ted Jr. is seriously wounded in the war. He's gassed, and he gets really shot up pretty good. A great officer, great soldier. He's going to die on the beach at Normandy of a heart attack in World War II. Becomes a general in the Second World War. His younger brother, Archie, is shot up even worse. But when the war ends, he's stateside. He's sort of being held together by Scotch tape. He is, as the Army rates these things, what percentage disability you have. Archie was rated 100% disabled. Despite that, he goes off and fights in the Second World War, like Ted Jr. in the Pacific. He's in the Pacific, and he's shot again. He's the only American rated 100% disabled in both wars. These Roosevelts are brave guys, okay? And then the last son is Quentin, who is the baby of the family. He leaves Harvard to join up and becomes an aviator. And it takes a while to get TR was right about preparedness. We didn't have the planes, we didn't have tanks, we didn't have the guns. So it takes a long time to get our flyboys into the air. It takes a while for Quentin to learn how to fly in formation, fly shooting through the propellers, the machine guns, and all that. On his first mission in 1918, Quentin shoots down a German pilot, and the family is just thrilled. His mother breaks a champagne glass in the celebration, and then he goes on his second mission. Bastille Day, July 14th, 1918, and he is across enemy lines, flying over enemy territory, and his plane goes down. And what is it? What is it? Word comes back to a reporter for the Associated Press, a telegram. It says, "Watch Sagamore Hill 4," and the rest is censored. And so the reporter goes up to to Sagamore Hill, sees Theodore Roosevelt, and says, "Look at this telegram." And TR goes, "This is not good. I don't know what this is, but this is not good. Kermit is in transit. The other 2 boys are wounded anyway. It's Quentin. Don't tell Mrs. Roosevelt. Do not tell Mrs.